In a remote village nestled in the heart of Hijaz, a region that embraced the teachings of Islam and adhered to the principles of the Quran, there lived a man named Yahya. Yahya was notorious for his lack of faith, his immorality, and his disrespect for the sacred values of the Muslim community. He had no regard for the sanctity of life, nor did he care for the dignity of others, particularly women. He was known far and wide for his corruption, malice, and lack of remorse for his sinful ways. This made him a pariah in a community that revered righteousness and justice. Yahya's life was one of excess and indulgence. He spent his days immersed in greed, lust, and violence, believing that his wealth and power shielded him from any consequences. He had no respect for religion or morality, and he often mocked the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. His arrogance was boundless, and he thought himself invincible, above the laws of Allah and the expectations of society. While others around him led lives of humility and devotion, Yahya reveled in his power, showing no remorse for the suffering he caused others. His actions were so vile that the community began to avoid him, warning their children to stay away from him. He was known to take advantage of the most vulnerable members of society, especially women, seeing them as objects for his pleasure rather than as people deserving of respect. But despite the whispers of his immoral actions, Yahya continued to go unchecked, for his wealth and influence seemed to give him immunity from justice. However, as we will see, no one can escape the consequences of their actions, and Yahya's day of reckoning was drawing near. In stark contrast to Yahya, there was a woman named Fatima. She was known for her unwavering faith, her kindness, and her deep connection to Allah. Fatima lived a life devoted to righteousness, prayer, and service to her community. She was a woman who embodied the true spirit of Islam, demonstrating humility, patience, and compassion in every aspect of her life. Fatima had a reputation for her piety and was respected by all who knew her. Her father, a noble and respected member of the village, had raised her with love, teaching her the values of Islam and the importance of adhering to its teachings. Fatima's life was simple but fulfilling. She spent her days caring for her family, performing her religious duties, and helping others. She was content in her faith and found peace in her connection to Allah. She had no reason to fear anything or anyone in this world because she trusted in the divine justice of Allah, believing that as long as she remained true to her faith, she would be protected from harm. But little did she know her peaceful existence was about to be shattered in the most unimaginable way. Fatima's life, which had been devoted to worship and goodness, would soon be marred by an act of violence and cruelty that would test her faith and the strength of her spirit. One fateful day, as Fatima was going about her usual chores, Yahya's dark and sinister presence emerged. He had set his eyes on her for some time, watching her from afar, knowing that her beauty, purity, and piety made her a target for his malevolent desires. He had no regard for the sanctity of her character or her dignity as a woman. Driven by his lust and wickedness, Yahya decided to attack Fatima in a manner so vile and barbaric that it would forever change her life. As Fatima walked through the fields on her way home, Yahya ambushed her. He dragged her into the nearby woods, where no one could hear her cries. Fatima, initially in shock, fought back with all her strength, but Yahya overpowered her. In that moment, the purity of her soul was assaulted in the most brutal and cruel way imaginable. It was a traumatic experience that left Fatima physically injured and emotionally devastated. The violation of her body and spirit was a wound that no one could heal, not even time. Fatima, broken and devastated by the brutal attack, returned to her family. She could barely speak, her body trembling from the physical and emotional pain. When her father saw her, he was immediately struck with disbelief and sorrow. He could not fathom that his beloved daughter had been subjected to such a horrifying crime. His heart broke as he embraced her, offering her comfort and assurance that justice would be served. Fatima's family, deeply shocked by what had happened, knew that they had to act swiftly. They immediately sought help from the community's religious leaders and elders, The scholars, men of wisdom, who had spent their lives studying the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were appalled by the crime. They called for immediate action to ensure that Yahya would face the consequences of his actions. They understood that this was not just a crime against Fatima, but an attack on the very foundation of Islam itself. The community, which had long been peaceful and respectful, was outraged by what had happened. The news of Yahya's assault on Fatima spread quickly, and many people came forward to support her, offering their prayers and solidarity. The religious leaders in particular emphasized that such a crime could not go unpunished, for it was a violation of Allah's commandments and the rights of the oppressed. In the wake of this tragedy, the religious scholars reminded the people of the Quranic verses that emphasized the importance of justice. They quoted the following verse, reminding everyone that Allah's justice would not allow any wrong to go unpunished. And do not think those who disbelieve are exempt from punishment. Indeed, we delay their retribution only to increase their sin. For them is a humiliating punishment. Quran 3:178. The scholars reminded the community that even though Yahya's actions seemed to go unpunished by human hands, Allah's justice was inevitable. The attack on Fatima was not merely an offense against her, but an offense against the very fabric of society, and it would not go unanswered. As the days passed, Yahya's behavior became more erratic. He began to experience physical discomfort and strange sensations. His once powerful and imposing body grew weak, and he started to lose his sense of self. His skin became pale and his movements sluggish. He could no longer revel in the power and control that had once defined him. Yahya's arrogance began to fade, and he became plagued with doubt, fear, and confusion. At first, Yahya dismissed these changes as illness or fatigue, but soon it became clear that something far more sinister was at play. He found himself unable to perform even the simplest of tasks, and his health deteriorated rapidly. His once sharp mind became clouded with confusion, and he began to lose his ability to think clearly. Yahya's physical decline was matched by his mental collapse, and he realized that he was no longer the man he had been. As Yahya continued to spiral into despair, his transformation took an even more bizarre turn. His body began to morph in ways that defied explanation. His face contorted, and his features became more animalistic. His hands, once capable of holding wealth and power, became gnarled and claw-like. Yahya's once human form was now unrecognizable. One night, as he looked at his reflection in a puddle of water, Yahya was horrified to see that his features had completely changed. He could no longer recognize the man he had once been. His eyes, once filled with arrogance and pride, were now wild and fearful, filled with a sense of desperation. Yahya had become an abomination, a grotesque figure that bore no resemblance to his former self. In his final moments, Yahya realized the gravity of his actions and the divine justice that had been meted out to him. He had violated the sanctity of a woman's body, dishonored her dignity, and disrespected the teachings of Islam. Now, in the form of a beast, he was left to face the consequences of his sins. Yahya's life came to a tragic end when his transformed body could no longer sustain itself. He died alone, in the form of a beast far removed from the power and pride that he had once known. His death served as a powerful reminder to the community that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, could escape the consequences of their actions. Yahya's transformation and eventual demise were seen as a direct consequence of his sinful life, a divine punishment for the harm he had caused. Fatima, while still carrying the scars of the attack, found solace in knowing that justice had been served. The entire community was reminded that Allah's justice is always present and that no one could escape the punishment for their wrongdoing. This story, though tragic, served as a valuable lesson for the people of the village. It reminded them of the importance of living righteous lives, respecting the dignity of others, and trusting in the ultimate justice of Allah. No wrong would go unpunished, and even the most powerful among us are not exempt from the consequences of their actions.